The WNBA is back at last, but what was happening off the court while all eyes were on Paris? Well, some person named Howard Megdal, yes, we have Howard Megdal here to discuss his reporting in the Nine newsletter from earlier this week and even at the end of July about what he's learned about the Las Vegas Aces relationship with the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, the LVCVA for short, a relationship that the W has opened an investigation into. And how connected is all of this to the news that came out on Monday from Dearica Hamby and her legal team that she is indeed suing the Aces and the league? Phew, that is a lot, and we are going to get into all of it. The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast, it starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm Jackie Powell. I'm one of your hosts on this program. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next, and I've covered women's basketball nationally at many other places. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember that we are brought to you by everyone at the Next, a place where we cover women's basketball all the time. And we tell the stories that need to be told each and every day. Subscribe now to support the staff at the Next that works oh so hard to bring you this coverage that matters oh so much. It is $9 a month or $72 per year. Find us at thenexthoops.com and subscribe. And remember that this podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. Today's episode is brought to you all by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So last time we were together, dear listener, I had Noah Dalzell on, and we examined the 5-on-5 women's basketball Olympic group round, and then we dove into some Team USA 3x3 and why that team was struggling. But 2 weeks later, of course, both teams walked away with a medal, both USA teams. But today, Howard and I are going to discuss a lot. And so in segment 1, we're going to explain Howard's reporting, some from this week and some from at the end of July. In segment 2, we're going to get into why exactly this investigation into the Las Vegas Aces matters. And then in segment 3, we're going to really connect the loop and connect those dots as to how Dearica Hamby's lawsuit connects with how the Aces are being investigated by the WNBA. Okay, so Howard, I think where I want to start is I want to remind people as to why the Las Vegas Aces are being investigated in the first place.
Yeah. No, it's a great and important thing to start at the top. On May 17th, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority had a big splashy announcement that they intended to pay each Aces player $100,000. That is, for the highest paid Aces players, still 30 to 40% of what they'll make in a given year. For some of the lesser paid players, that is a greater total than their annual salary would be. So it was a very big deal. And what the league decided to do, and if you'll forgive tooting my own horn, what I reported first the next day was that the WNBA had some questions about how this came about, whether it was kosher within the framework of the league's collective bargaining agreement, and wanted to look into that further. The league has subsequently hired a law firm, Cobra and Kim, to further look into this issue. And there is an active investigation going on that has talked to, among other people, Steve Hill, who was the president of the LVCVA and who was front and center for that announcement. This is in part, I believe, a response to the Aces having flouted the collective bargaining agreement before. And as we reported last year, both reported the initial investigation and then ultimately reported through what the punishments were. The league found that the Aces had done so last year, and they had a first-round draft pick in 2025 taken away from them as a result. And so you put all of that together, and there's obviously a fair amount to look into, but as we'll talk about, I'm sure there is the ability to have visibility into this investigation as it is happening this year in a way that we didn't last year.
That is all very important context. Thank you for bringing listeners up to speed. And so obviously there is something to be said about, how did we find out the first time that the Aces might have been violating the collective bargaining agreement? The answer to that question is what we'll be discussing in segment 3, which is Dearica Hamby and her lawsuit. But Howard, I think where I want to go next is, what was the most important thing that you found this week that you made very clear in the 9 newsletter? And by the way, listeners, I will attach all of Howard's reporting on this investigation in the show notes, so you won't miss anything.
I appreciate that. And the most important thing, and again, to get to the top of it, there is an entire section of the collective bargaining agreement between the league and its players about circumvention, about the fact that we have this, the salary cap, and to go around it is a problem for reasons that we'll talk about when we get into why does this matter? Because it does to a large number of people around the league and the league itself, for reasons that are not just nobody wants to pay the players, because that's really not it. The people who are most aggressive about wanting to pay players more are concerned about this. This is sort of the easiest way to put it. But ultimately, what the league and what we found about this week is the league is trying to determine whether the Aces are directly involved in the paying of players that is happening from the LVCVA. If a fully independent body decides to sponsor players having nothing to do with a team, that is all legal under the terms of the CBA. If a team is involved, and then you get into how involved, and that gets to how egregiously is a violation happening, and therefore what was the punishment likely to be as a result of it, then you start getting into the problem areas. And I say that by which we have information, and that information comes from emails, correspondence that the LVCVA has a legal obligation to release, that a senior executive with the Las Vegas Aces was directly involved in directing how this would happen and enlisting his team, the Las Vegas Aces, to help with what ultimately has become the key number one deliverable in the deal between the players and the LVCVA. Matt Delson, who is the CFO and COO of the Las Vegas Aces, near the very top of the chart, son of Larry Delson, who has been essentially the right-hand man to Mark Davis for going on 5 decades now. And having that level of involvement, directing what is happening, is where you run into greater problems. There are other areas that make it clear that the initial story from the Aces and the LVCVA alike that, this we had nothing to do with one another about this. It does not hold up to basic scrutiny or even within the framework of their own timeline of events. But this new detail, when you add in the fact that Delson himself is advising the LVCVA not to let the commissioner know about this, adds another element altogether.
Yeah, that was pretty jarring when I read your story. Pretty intentional that, let's not let Kathy know about this. I guess for me, the first thing that I thought of was, well, I mean, you're withholding evidence there of breaking the rules. That was the first thing that I saw, unless there's something else that you think sticks out there about why that means something.
It's something that jumps out at me. I reached out, of course, to the Aces and to the LVCVA about it. Specifically said to the Aces, why did he think that was necessary to tell them not to do? And their first answer was, well, it didn't involve the commissioner because it wasn't even about this arrangement. And of course, the email itself, we have it printed in its entirety over at the 9 newsletter. I mean, it's clear. No, the email is, of course, about this on May 16th before any agents had been contacted. So a deal was made between the LVCVA and somebody. We still don't have who it was made with, but the number of people it could be made with is very small, and it's $2.4 million. But then when I said, why specifically did Matt Delson say not to do this? The answer was, we take exception to you asking that question, which is, of course, a non-responsive answer.
So just to clarify something before we move on to our second segment, you were referencing this redacted document, which you can find in the 9 newsletter. Once again, folks, I will be putting this in the show notes. You brought it up a little bit, but why exactly does that redacted document matter, or what does it mean alongside the email, which from when I looked at it, to me, that was like, oh yeah, that's proof that this is coordinated.
Well, there are 2 different emails. And to be clear, I reviewed 990 pages of documents through a public records request in order to determine what had happened, what we could learn, and what questions still remained. And so the document that is redacted, there are 2 parts to it, right? There's one, which is that it says background. Women's professional sports, and specifically the WNBA, is experiencing a meteoric rise in popularity and in turn seeing tremendous commercial growth. So this is part of R&R Partners, which is the company, the marketing company, the LVCVA typically uses to create marketing purchases for themselves. All right, so there's your background. We all know that. Okay. Situation is the next one. Redacted. Okay, that's interesting. What is the situation? One would think that involves, I don't even want to speculate. It's fair to wonder what we're talking about the situation is. And then, by the way, also opportunity. Redacted. But we do have solution. The LVCVA sponsors every player on the Aces individually, sparking your movement of support, generating earned coverage, and ultimately visitation to the destination. So something, it's very similar to that meme, situation number 1, number 2, question mark, question mark, question mark, number 3, profit, right? That middle part, it was defined. How it was defined has been redacted. And the problem with Nevada public records law is if you do redact it, you need to have a reason and you need to explain what was the subject matter that was redacted. And the LVCVA has provided neither. We are over a week on. Ultimately, I would continue to press them on it. Cobra and Tim, you can be sure, will do so as well. Ultimately, they have means of being able to force the issue as do we if push comes to shove. But that's part one. Part two is there is an attachment to that email. Room for pay _ one pager _ version 2 .docx, which presumably tells you in great detail what the details are about of the two redacted things. That was also withheld. And again, I spoke to an attorney about this who made it clear if an email is subject to a public records request, so is the attachment. And so, again, there's a lot more details there. Like you said, there's problematic things enough in just what was turned over. So it certainly bears watching.
All right, folks. Coming up, we're going to get into why this investigation matters. But first, I do want to tell all of you about our good friends at Game Time. And so during summertime, I love going to MLB games and I love going to concerts too. For instance, next week I'm seeing Avril Lavigne and Simple Plan at the PNC Bank Arts Center. I know you'd think I'm probably from Canada. I'm not. I just happen to like these two pop punk Canadian artists. But anyway, I got my tickets on Game Time. And when I was surfing the app for the best price ticket, I was able to see around where I'd be sitting. I wanted lawn seats, and the Game Time app made sure I was getting my money's worth with the lowest price guaranteed. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or concert tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you, Game Time. We appreciate you. Now, I do want to also tell you all about our friends at Apostrophe. So one of the biggest things that can lead to imposter syndrome is not having self-confidence. And it's important to have confidence in your skin. Acne breakouts, rosacea, wrinkles, these can all take a toll on your confidence level. And that's why we're really excited to partner with Apostrophe, which is a sponsor of this episode. And so Apostrophe's goal is to help you feel confident in your own skin. And so I use Apostrophe when it comes to hormonal acne that comes up almost once a month. And so Apostrophe is a platform where essentially you take pictures of yourself online and you submit them. And that gives you, and those pictures go to an expert dermatology team that helps get you customized acne treatment for your unique skin. So anyway, we have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/lockedon when you use our code LOCKEDON. That's a savings of $15. This is a code only available to our listeners. So to get started, you go to apostrophe.com/lockedon and click Get Started, and then use our code LOCKEDON at the sign up, and you'll get your first visit for only $5. All right. Why don't we get back to our program, shall we? All right. So before we get into why this matters, we just want to remind you, well, first of all, we want to thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen of every day. But now for your second listen, we want you to hop over to the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no off season in the NBA. Well, the same goes in women's basketball too, but you all know that. And Locked On NBA provides daily pro men's basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. It is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Howard, I'm just going to ask you point blank. Why does this investigation matter? There has been a lot of resistance to this. We've heard Asia Wilson sort of say in interviews, it can't always be, or quote, it can't always be investigate, investigate, investigate. We're trying to make things better for franchises, players, and teams. So why does this investigation matter then?
I have a ton of respect for A'ja Wilson, who she is as a player and a person.
Me
This
too.
is just more general. I know. And this is just more generally rather than what I feel about it, what people across the league feel about it. And it is simply that for the question of competitive balance in the league, if some teams are able to do things other teams are either unable to do or are unaware that they're able to do, if these things are not violations, then that ultimately tilts the lead in a specific direction. To use sort of an on-court version of this, investigate. Well, sometimes players get called for fouls over and over and over again, right? Well, if every time somebody comes down the lane, you absolutely hack the penetrating player again and again and knock her to the floor every single time, and the whistle keeps getting blown, it isn't that, oh, wow, a lot of fouls are being called. In this case, somebody is committing a lot of fouls. And so, especially in light of the fact that both investigations last year, and it's worth noting, those were two interconnected but separate investigations. One was about the treatment of a player in terms of the workplace as it relates to Dearica Hamby. The other was, were there impermissible benefits given? And we can talk a little bit about sort of the limitations of how that investigation progressed last year. Those ultimately, the league found that the Aces had committed both of those infractions. So investigate. Well, the first two investigates turned out there was something there. The third one, which blows a hole in the salary cap. Now, you and I know that the salary cap is lower than WNBA revenues mean it should be. And that's something that is clearly well on its way to being fixed. If the players opt out as expected following this year, and then that triggers an opt-out following the 25 season, there's nothing preventing the two sides from coming to an agreement early. By the way, it's worth noting that as well. And now that we have the media rights deal information in place, it's easier and easier to find a pathway forward if both sides are aggressively looking toward finding that solution specific to the league. All of that said, whatever the new salary cap turns out to be, whatever the new rules of the road turn out to be, if some teams flagrantly violate that too, it creates tremendous problems for how the entire league operates. And I say this is not just an WNBA of the moment concern across team executives. This is something that many leagues have taken seriously for a very long time. You go back to the NBA, and I've written about this previously, when the Minnesota Timberwolves violated the CBA with a secret agreement with Joe Smith. They had 5 years of draft picks taken away. Their Joe Smith agreement was voided, and their owner was both fined a significant amount of money and suspended for a year. And I just think it's worth noting that these are all tools at Kathy Engelbert's disposal. Now, when we get into the Dearica Hamby lawsuit part of this, that's where the difference this time around, to go back to investigate, may lead to a different outcome, though that is obviously one of the great remaining unknowns here.
Right. And so I guess before we move on to talking about Dearica Hamby's lawsuit, why would you say does competitive balance matter? I know that's a very overarching and broad question, but why?
If you don't have a league where everyone has the same opportunity to compete and win, owners are not going to want to stick around in that league. If it is a rigged game, people don't want to play it. There is a reason why most people don't want to go play 3-card Monte. And so if you have a scenario where cheating is essentially allowed to go on, I'm not saying it did happen in this case, it's still to be determined. But if you have that on a regular basis, people are looking to invest in the WNBA right now. This is arguably the most important time the WNBA has ever faced. There are several moving parts to that. One of them was a new media rights deal. I've written about this at the 9 as well. That is a big win for Kathy Engelbert and the WNBA at an elevated pay rate, while also on several existing channels, including ESPN, which means ABC functionally, that gives them an opportunity for the existing audience that is there already, right? You have a CBA coming up where the new rules are going to be written, and they're going to matter, not just in writing, but in execution as well. And you're going to have potentially 2 more teams at least, because Kathy Engelbert has said the WNBA wants 16 teams by 2028. How much are people going to pay, and how much are they going to invest in winning? And even your newer owners who are already there, how involved are they going to be? How into it are they going to be over time? These are all the reasons why there needs to be rules of the road that are universal. It's not just hey, let's play fair, everybody. There's real money at stake here for the WNBA.
Yeah, essentially, if the game is rigged for new or maybe not so new owners, they won't want to be a part of it. And so then the game collapses and teams fold. And that's a place where we thought we were past. You know, we thought we were past the years around the financial crisis where you saw teams left and right folding.
Can I just say, it's not a women's basketball thing. Again, I go back to David Stern took that extraordinarily seriously around the turn of the century when the NBA was extremely well established. This was about 60 years into the NBA. They had a massive media rights deal, pennies by today's standard, but, ask anybody my age to sing Round Ball Rock, and they will immediately tell you, they may even do it with the Saturday Night Live lyrics. So the NBA was fully well established, and it still mattered that much to David Stern that the penalty was immense, because you are not just looking about what's happening today, you're looking about future investment as well.
Absolutely. Well, coming up, we're going to connect some dots and explain how this connects to Dearica Hamby's lawsuit. But first, we do want to chat about our good friends at FanDuel. So I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you, FanDuel. And we are back. I'm here with the one and only Howard Megdal, where we've been talking all things Las Vegas and their investigation. So it was a typical WNBA Monday earlier this week when we got an email in our inboxes that announced that Dearica Hamby has officially filed a lawsuit against not only the Las Vegas Aces, but the WNBA. So Howard, I think where I want to start here and what I think listeners should understand is, why is this happening right now?
It is happening right now because there is a process before you can sue your employer that has to take place. There has to be an EEOC complaint that is resolved in such a way that it clears a path for the lawsuit. By the way, women's sports fans have some predecessor here. The U.S. women's national team and their equal pay fight did not sue immediately. First, filed a complaint against U.S. Soccer with the EEOC, which had to run its course ahead of what was then a lawsuit. And then, by the way, ultimately a settlement down the line that, well, it's a whole other show, but that U.S. Soccer could have done years before. But that being said, all of those things happening paved the way for this then to happen.
Right, exactly. And I believe she filed the EEOC complaint in September of 2023, and it completely processed, I believe, and she got her, I think it was her letter to sue in May. Right. So this is all, as you said, very procedural. So let's connect the dots. How exactly is the Dearica Hamby lawsuit connected to the investigation that the Aces are under?
Tangential, right? So Hamby alleges two things in the suit where she names both the Aces and the WNBA. The Aces, she accuses of two front issues. One is the extent to which she was treated once she was pregnant, both how she was traded, that promises were made to her that were not kept, according to her in the lawsuit, and the way that Becky Hammon talked to her specifically were all problematic things in her view in the lawsuit that she put forward. How does that connect? Well, number one, you have the fact that some of what was promised to her were impermissible benefits, which the Aces were punished for last year, but again, speaks to when you figure out this year, it's not some blank slate. Oh, well, where did this come from when the league is investigating this year? But there's another part to that. The league is named in the lawsuit because in the view of Hamby, in the complaint, the league did not do enough to protect, in this case, Hamby. In other words, the league ultimately is getting named in this lawsuit because the league did not take strong enough action in Hamby's view to protect her. And so as you are seeing another investigation take place, you are already, first of all, seeing a difference between last investigation and this one, in that the W is not handling it internally. They have hired a law firm externally to do it. There are interviews taking place that it is clear were not taking place last investigation, as I reported in my piece. I don't believe that's been anywhere before. The league did not talk to any Aces players, but the league in its resolution said the Aces cooperated, which means that was the league's decision not to investigate or question any other Aces players in that investigation. Is that happening this time around? And then if so, and this we don't know, the Aces would face a decision. If they are asked to provide players, if they do, you risk exposure. If you don't, you risk the opportunity of not being seen as cooperative when this is ultimately decided by first Kobe and Kim with their recommendations and ultimately by the league. So you put all that together, and those two things are significant. The final thing is from a PR perspective. Kathy Engelbert got to go on Good Morning America this week with Robin Roberts, who, to her massive credit, has long reported about and been an advocate for more coverage in the WNBA. And in a 5-minute segment on Good Morning America, Kathy had to answer for the last minute about Dearica Hamby and the lawsuit. And so the question is whether the league, at a critical PR moment, wants to be seen as part of whatever it is determined the Aces have done here. And again, we don't know definitively what the Aces have done, but we know a lot already of what the Aces have done. And the league has an opportunity within the public relations moment of the lawsuit to give itself a degree of separation from the Aces with how it responds to this investigation. So all of those things put together make for, like I said, things that are tangential and absolutely fascinating. But by the way, ultimately unknowable as of today in how they will all turn out.
Before we have to go, and it is almost that time, I think what I do want to know, Howard, is what could be an example of the league trying to separate itself, if you could explain that to the listeners.
Sure. Well, I simply put, that if the league comes down hard on the Aces in determining that there was wrongdoing, and not just determining there was wrongdoing, but in the punishment for the wrongdoing, then it is doing the opposite of what most people around the league believed last year was, which was a slap on the wrist, which is something specifically cited in the Dearica Hamby lawsuit. I heard from executives saying, all right, now we know what the price is for cheating. We have to give up a draft pick that ain't worth very much because ultimately we kept a team together that has won 2 consecutive championships. So that's what that means. But I will just say one other thing before we go, which is there is just a personal level of aggravation that I kind of get it. Why is Asia frustrated about this? We're frustrated too. It is our job to report what is actually happening. And that is both the greatness on the court and these multiple investigations. It would be delightful to just focus on the basketball. But when investigations are happening from the league over things that last year turned out to be violations of the CBA on multiple fronts, we got to talk about it.
We do. And that's why I had you on today, Howard. So thank you for being here. And to the listeners, thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no off season in the NBA, but there's also no off season in women's basketball, and the WNBA, and women's college basketball, as you all know. And Locked On NBA, you can find it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Howard, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. I think I learned a little bit more about how all of this comes together, and I think the listeners will too. So anyway, this has been Jackie Powell and
Howard Megdal.
And we are signing off. Have a great weekend, everyone.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.